get this thing started. My name is David Preston, and I'm a member of Sons and Daughters of Holocaust Survivors, which was founded in 1979 in Philadelphia. I'd like to ask everybody to please be sure that you're muted unless your name is David Lee Preston or Phyllis Sterling Jacobs. This year, our organization began hosting special Zoom programs beginning in January 22nd was our first one. We had three women who met in Ann Arbor, Michigan, who were co-authors of a book called The Ones Who Remember: Second Generation Voices of the Holocaust. Really a wonderful book that was recommended to us by our member, Isabel Redner-Alkoff. These women, Ruth Finkel-Wade, Esther Gombosi, and Fran Berg, really enhanced our day. And it was such a successful program that when we posted a screenshot of that, we had a lot of inquiries from people around the country, really around the world, who wanted to know how they could hear the program. And so, boosted by the success of that, we plowed forward and had a second program in March 19th. We had Stephen J. Ross, who is a child of survivors and a professor of history at the University of Southern California, who spoke about his sensational book, Hitler in Los Angeles: How Jews Foiled Nazi Plots Against Hollywood and America. Another program that was recorded and that resulted in a lot of interest, which brings us to today. Today, I have the honor of hosting another member of our Philly group who I have known for many years, and my relationship with this book goes back to the mid-90s. This extremely powerful book, when Phyllis contacted me for guidance on how to turn her tape recordings of her father's words into a book. I will introduce Phyllis momentarily, but I just want to say that our next special program in this series will be June 25th. We will have Andrew Cassell, my former Inquirer colleague, and Gabriel Laufer. They collaborated on bringing out a book by a man who died in 1944 named Dr. Aharon Pick, called Notes from the Valley of Slaughter, a memoir from the ghetto of Šiauliai, Lithuania. A truly extraordinary project that has just been published by the University of Indiana Press. And you'll be hearing more about that, but please mark the date, June 25th. All of our programs are at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Phyllis contacted me several years ago for some guidance on how to turn her father's words into a book. And Phyllis, I don't think I ever met your dad, but when you shared with me some of his memoir, I do recall advising you to put it out just as he said it. And I don't think I was the only one who gave you that advice. The result is this really powerful book that's entirely in her father's words, and that we will make sure that when we're done, by the time this program is over, Phyllis will share with you information on how to get your hands on it. It is really, I think, forgive me for saying it, it's a textbook example of how to put out your parents' memories in a way that is compelling and powerful and meaningful. And it goes without saying, I don't really need to say that it's never been more essential for the world to have these personal accounts of what happened when the Germans uh, did their thing to our people. And without further ado, I want to mute myself and turn this over to my dear friend Phyllis.
First of all, on this beautiful spring day, thank you all for being here. And thank you so much, David, for inviting me to do this, because what this did is forced me to actually gather my thoughts once again, revisit some things, and put a cohesive talk together. And in that process, it really is an internal process for myself. So I thank you. I will talk about my father's, about how this book was created. I'll read you some excerpts from the book and entertain any questions you might have. And also, I'd like to hear from you about a little bit about your journey in terms of just living with this, if you are a child of survivors. I consider myself a child of survivors, even though I'm beyond the child age. But that's how I see, I just do see myself as a child of survivors. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of background first. Okay, my parents, Simon and Sophie Sterling, were 36 and 38 years old when their town of Stervitz was invaded. It was a village near Brody, near Lviv, Lemberg, whatever name one wants to give it. And of their entire family, only my parents and two brothers of my father's remained. They had a 6-year-old child who was killed in the Brody ghetto, and everyone else was killed. We came to Philadelphia in 1949. After the war, they lived in Fehrenwald, which is a DP camp. And I was born while they were living in the DP camp. They were there for 3 years. My father wanted to come to the United States. He thought that it would be safer. How did we come to Philadelphia? We came to Philadelphia. My father remember. Someone is not muted. Okay. Thank you. We came to Philadelphia. My father remembered that his mother's entire family, actually at the turn of the century, immigrated to Philadelphia, and he knew the last name. So in the DP camp, Jewish soldiers brought phone books from every major city in the United States and sat with the survivors, and they asked them if they knew any relatives anywhere, because we couldn't come here without a sponsor. So my father remembered the last name of Bodick, that was his mother's name, and that he had there was a large number of Bodicks in Philadelphia. So this soldier wrote a letter in English to all the Bodicks in Philadelphia, and my father mentioned some names that he remembered, so they knew he was for real. And one of them answered and said, yes, we will sponsor you. And that's how we got to Philadelphia. So I grew up in Winfield, as I was telling Joe. And my mother, my parents were older survivors. They were not, teenagers during the war. My father was 43 when we came here, and my mother was 40. My mother, very sadly, was traumatized in the extreme and really never left the trauma. I mean, she really suffered with depression, sadness, anxiety. Never really emerged in a healthy way, in a way that helped her to live a good life. My father was different. He was out there. He started a business. He had friends. He was social. I mean, all their friends were survivor friends for the most part. But fortunately, he was able to function well and start a new life for himself here. And I was a good girl. I don't know if that's, I gave my parents no trouble whatsoever. I mean, zero. I was silent. Quiet, good, no problems, no questions, never asked them anything, new, hands off, taboo. I would hear, the only place I would hear things is when they had friends over playing cards. They would sit around and, I'm a little kid and I hear camp, or I hear this town or that town, and they're playing cards, but I had no idea what they were talking about. But I knew my parents were survivors. I mean, they didn't speak English, and that it was. I just knew that they came from a very dark place. That I did know. So as I was saying, growing up, I really no questions came to my mind. Everything was really taboo. I just knew, not consciously. There was no conscious, like, gee, I shouldn't ask them this question. It was unconscious understanding. You don't go there, period. Just knew it. And they didn't tell me anything. I didn't know I had a brother until I was about 34. And my mother was still alive. And I said to my father one day, did I ever have a sibling? And he just turned white. We were, I mean, you know how you remember where you were when something happened? I remembered we were in the parking lot of his apartment building, and he said, yes. I said, what name? Zygmunt, age 6. And the next thing he said, never mention this to your mother. Never did. And I never really mentioned it to him again. That was it. That was it. That was as far as he could go and as far as I could go. Okay. So the question that for myself is, since I was pretty silent and really just living with this, what do I do with this? And how do I manage as an adult? How do I manage an adult to actually mourn people? How do you mourn people you've never met? Really, if someone dies, you know them, you mourn them. How do you mourn a family that you never saw, whose names you barely know? How do you mourn a life that you really, sort of like a normal life that you see around you, which I did see. My friends were all kind of like in these American families, and I wasn't. That was not my life. So how do you manage that growing, as an adult? How do you honor people, honor their memory, things, we would have these ceremonies and everything, but it was kind of like an organizational thing, not a personal thing. And the last question I had is, how do I acknowledge my own story? Because I always felt they have a story. Their story is so big and so sad and so hard. And I don't have a story because I grew up here. But then as I became an adult in my 40s, really, I figured out that I have a story too. And that took a while to really acknowledge to myself, because I didn't feel like I did have a story. So one of the things the first thing I did, first thing I actually did, I mean, when I say did, I write that with capital letters, D-I-D, because I did something, was I asked my father, after my mother died, if I could sit with him in a tape recorder, and get a chronological story, because I had nothing. And he said yes. He said yes. And I went to his apartment with this old rickety tape recorder. And I have to say this, in the beginning was the war. I didn't even ever ask him about anything from before the war. It was like the war was the beginning of life, the beginning. And maybe it was also, I knew kind of, since he didn't offer to tell me about anything from before, I think it was also taboo to talk about people. You know, when people die, you talk about them in a wonderful way. But when people are killed, it's so painful that I just knew. I never asked him about his parents. I never asked him about his sisters, his nieces. I just didn't ask. But he did tell me about, he did start to tell me about the, from the war. And we sat with a tape recorder over a cup of coffee, and then we'd stop, do it for an hour and stop, and then come back. And it took a couple months, and we got to the end of the story, and I never asked him more about it, and I never referred to it. I just had it on the tapes. I'm going to just read to you, and what David said. David's advice was so important, because this is his story. It is not my story. And when someone writes about someone else's life, they're telling their interpretation of life. So I kept this completely in his words. And I have to thank the editor that I brought it to, who totally got that. And I just want to read something to you. This is how he started. This is how we started. The first day we sat down with the tape recorder, and this is what he said to me. Quote, I don't want to tell you this. I don't want to make you feel bad. It's not your fault. Thank God I'm all right, you understand. Only it's so hard. It's so hard to explain. It's unbelievable to get through. You have a sentence for death if only they catch you. And you run, and every place where you're going, there are enemies and enemies and enemies. You understand? How do you hide from so many enemies? That's how he started. And I think that's really true. How do you tell this? How do you tell this? And how do you tell this to a daughter? Like he said, I don't want to make you feel bad. It's not your fault. But he was, yeah. And then he says, it's very hard to explain this to people here. They can't understand. And a lot of times I had in my mind, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm not explaining it to them correctly. Then I figured, no, I'm explaining it plain. It doesn't go in their minds because people here in the United States, in this democratic country, cannot understand. It's unbelievable. So how much should I tell them? I don't know, but I'm going to tell you this. So he started to tell me about his, here's a picture of my father, and that's him talking to me. And that's me way back when. Okay, I just want to read a few other parts. I don't want to tell his story, although I can tell you because he tells it himself. He really does. And I'll read some parts to you. I will be happy to get the book to you if you want a hard copy. It's on Kindle, but he tells his story and himself in his words, and I'm going to keep it like that. But I'll read something else about how his escape. This is one of them. He was in a camp, a small camp, where they kept people for a short period of time, and then they would kill them, and then bring in more to work for a few weeks or a month. And this, so he was in this camp. He was separated from my mother. I just want to say, my parents knew each other since they grew up in the same village. They were boyfriend and girlfriend at the age of 13. They married a little late, but they got married and they were together all their lives. They were separated at this point when my father was. They were in the Brody ghetto, and my father was taken as a male to this camp. They later reunited and lived together in the woods for almost a year, but that's later. But I just wanted, I'd like to read about about the escape. Everyone who was working had a piece of cloth on his shoulder. The men who worked on the railroad had a red piece. I was working with the Wehrmacht, so I had a W. It would be impossible to get out of here if I stayed inside. So I decided people who went to work on the railroad outside of the gate could have a chance of escaping. If I could be in that group, I would escape somehow. Sometimes something can happen on the road. So I planned at 6 o'clock in the morning, when the group that went to the railroad started getting together, I would try to join them. They got up a little bit earlier than the other people. One day, it was raining like cats and dogs. The German who was holding the guns, who was marching the people out, told the guard at the main gate, "We're taking them out. We have 200 people." Everyone was standing in line and being counted. It was raining so hard, I took off my W and I put on a piece of red cloth. I quickly stepped into this group. A Jewish man from Brody was doing the counting. The Germans always picked a Jewish man to do the final count. He was a friend of mine before the war. He saw me and he stepped next to me and he said very quietly, "Simon, what are you doing here?" "Don't ask any questions," I said, and he walked away. He counted and he didn't count me in. I had known this man would do the counting, but I didn't know whether or not he would count me in or whether he would tell them I was in line. I didn't tell him beforehand because I was afraid if I told him, I'd be placing his life in danger. He would be shot. I knew that no one, I knew that no one would count again because it was raining so hard. We marched to the gate and the guard pushed the button and the gate opened. On the left side of the street was a stone wall. On the right were empty, bombed out houses. I remembered seeing them when they first took us to this camp. The mud was 2 feet high. The Germans were walking alongside us on the pavement. They had their raincoats on and their hoods over their heads, and they couldn't see on the side. I was marching in the middle of the row and I pushed someone over to the middle, placed him in my spot, and I moved to the side. Then I moved to the back of the line behind a soldier. I spotted a house with the door and I opened it, with the door open. I took one step and I was behind the door. The people who were marching didn't say anything. They were in the same position that I was in. The Germans kept walking and walking. I was standing behind the door and they were going and going. I closed my eyes. I figured in a minute I'll be shot, but they're going and going and they were out of sight. Okay, so that's how he got out of this camp. And he found his way. My father had lots of friends who were not Jewish, and that saved him. One of the things that saved him. Because when all this was happening, a Polish farmer in his town, who was a good friend of his, said, if you ever need help, you come to me. When my father escaped from this camp, he made his way to this farmer's house. He hid in the barn, and the farmer came in and found him there. He said the farmer fainted. Literally, he fell down because he knew he had to make a decision. Either get out or I risk my family's life by keeping you here. And he kept him there. And he fed him, his wife brought him food, and he was there for about 2 weeks. My mother was in the Brody ghetto, where he was taken from. And when the ghetto was completely, everyone was killed in the ghetto or taken out. My father built a hiding place for my mother, and there's some other people in the hiding place. And they stayed in this hiding place until the Nazis actually left the ghetto. There was no one left. They had no one else to kill. And my mother climbed out of this hiding place. And my father told her, if we're ever separated, you find your way to the Lukashevich farm. And it was about 20 miles walking. She literally walked out of the ghetto because no one was left, and walked and miraculously found her way to my father. Sadly, though, their 6-year-old child was killed in the ghetto. I don't know how. I do not know how, and I never asked. But she found her way to this farm, and my father had already given up hope that she was alive completely. And the farmer came to my father and said, "I have a surprise for you." He said, "What surprise?" And my mother, he said, she looked like she weighed about 60 pounds and she was half dead, but she managed to get to this farmer's house. And he kept them both together for a short time. But then the neighbors were asking about, they got money for reporting Jews. So the neighbors were kind of checking things out, and he felt it. And he told my parents that he can't keep them in his house in the barn anymore, but he would help them if they go in the woods, and help them with food or whatever he could do, but they can't stay with him anymore. And that's what my parents did. They lived in the woods for almost a year. And my father describes there were some other Jews living in the woods, just digging holes like animals. And during the day, being in these holes, and at night going out for some food or some air. Yeah, so I want to go back to me. So that was one thing that I did. I got the story from my father, and then he passed away in 1986. So I didn't make a book out of it. I just had it, I had the tapes, but I was thinking of making a book. The next thing that I did was, I heard, this is David, I've told David that he has a big part in this, and I don't think he knows how big. I heard David and his father give a talk, and they talked about honoring people at Yad Vashem. Now, when my father was alive, this farmer that helped him, my father sent every 2 months money to this farmer from the time he got here until before he died, when he was sending money to his son. So a few months before he died, he was still sending money to the farmer's son every 2 months. So I had all these letters, and I knew about this, but he never thought about honoring him at Yad Vashem. And I don't think it came across his mind. He died in 86. So I heard David give this talk, and I walked up to David afterwards and I said, my parents they're not from far from Lvov. And they were helped by farmers, by people who really. He said, "Well, did you have them honored by Yad Vashem?" And I said, "No." And he said, quote unquote, "Well, you really should." And I walked away from there and I said, "Well, I really should." And it was like, okay, so I'm going to do this. So when I think about myself, in terms of I couldn't save my family, I couldn't save my parents, I couldn't save the heartache they went through, but I can do something. I can do something. So I wrote to Yad Vashem, and they said, we're really sorry, but most, we honor people usually it's first person, the person who was saved, is the person gives the evidence. Do you have any evidence at all or anything? So I said, yeah, I have like 100 letters back and forth from this farmer to my father, back and forth over the years. And they said, okay, send them. So I sent them all the letters. They were all in Polish. And finally, it took about a year. In the meantime, the farmer had died, but the farmer's wife was living in Canada. And I contacted her right before I contacted Yad Vashem and found out she was in the hospital very ill. So Yad Vashem is trying to decide about honoring them, and she's in the hospital. So finally, I picked up the phone and I called Paltiel, the head of the, and I said, look, if you're going to honor this family, do it now. The woman is in the hospital, and, don't sit on it. So he about a week later, they called me and they said, we're doing it. We're doing it. So I flew to Saskatoon, Canada, and the woman was in the hospital. And the local newspapers got a hold of this, and the town rallied behind her, and they did a ceremony in the cafeteria of the hospital with about 500 people there. I mean, it was fabulous because she was well enough she lived 2 years after that too. She was well enough to get it, and totally. Her family was honored. The whole city kind of rallied around, there was articles in the newspapers, and I felt like I did this. I was so proud of myself. So thank you, David. You see, it was like a key moment in my life to actually meet the farmer's wife, who was instrumental in all of it. My father describes how he would prepare food. She would prepare food for him. Yes, that's a picture. Yes, that's a picture of us together when I went out there in 91. It was really a highlight of my life to have them honored. It was just amazing. Okay, so I did that, and it was great. Okay, the other thing, then the book. I had these tapes. I had it transcribed. In 2004, I decided I'm going to make a book out of it. So I did. I brought it to a woman who's an editor who lives around the corner, and I said, I just have to. Her name is Joyce. I have to mention this. It was so encouraging. She said, I said, how much do you charge for editing? And it's $50 an hour. Let me see the transcript. I brought her the transcript. She called me 2 days later. She says, I'm doing it for nothing. Let's get started. It was just so kind. And we worked on the book for about a year. And so I really was I was just proud of myself that this story lives in this book, and I created it. And I never say I wrote the book. I say I created the book. I didn't write it. He wrote it. It's his story. He tells it. I was the vehicle for that to be available to people to know. I was the vehicle of the story. And so that made me feel really good. Well, I was reading a book called Everything is Illuminated, about a young man who went back to his town in Ukraine. And I was sitting in bed reading, and I remember my husband was asleep, and I poked him. I said, we're going to Stervitz. We're going there. I just felt like I had to go there. So I'd like to read, I want to say something. When people ask me to talk or do something, it encourages me to write and think. So again, I want to thank David. I did recently, I did a course in Jewish storytelling, and I decided to write my own story. Instead of telling the story, it was Hasidic tales, and I thought, I'm going to write my own. So I want to read you the story that I wrote, because it's about my trip. This is about my trip back to Stervitz with my husband. Okay, and here is my story. God does not want to bother souls in heaven as they go about their business doing exactly what they want to do. My father, for example, is in the middle of an intense card game with his buddies. He has a great hand. And my mother is making everything sparkle. The silver clearly needs another shining. Long after they relocated to heaven, they noticed that I might need some help. I was planning a trip back to their village of Stervitz, and they looked for a messenger on earth who had the time and inclination to help me. I think they picked the perfect one. Let me know what you think. It all started in 2005 when I was devouring a book called Everything is Illuminated about a young man who went back to Ukraine, to his family's village. Right there, I told my husband, we are going to Stervitz. That's where my family lived until 1942, before they were ripped from their homes and most were killed. Miraculously, and that is another story, my parents survived and arrived with me at the age of 3 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 1949. We will go to America where it will be safe. The village of Stervitz was frozen in time with dirt roads and neat little wooden houses. Svetlana, our guide and translator, stopped the very first person we saw, a man of about 40 walking with his daughter. These people came all the way from America to see the town where their family came from. They're Jewish. Do you by any chance know who they could talk to about the Jews who once lived here? Yes, me. Yes, me. I can tell them. I know all about the Jews who lived here. My grandfather used to tell me stories about them. I actually don't even live here. I'm just here for the day to visit some friends, but I can show you around. And so he did. The Fish family lived over there, and Mendel lived in that house. And here was the mikveh, and there stood the synagogue, and there was the bank of the river where the Jews used to bathe and the wells they used. Yes, his grandfather told him all of this. As we were about to leave and I was about to thank him, I noticed the flour mill that my father used to own. He told me about that flour mill. Look, that's my father's flour mill. He bent down and looked me in the eyes and said, my grandfather worked in that flour mill. And so I imagine my father and his grandfather sitting together, making a plan to send us the perfect messenger, allowing them to keep on doing whatever they wanted uninterrupted. What do you think? And it's a true story, 100%. Now, I can't say that, yeah, I believe the rest of it, but as far as the plan, it was planned. Anyway, so that was when I went back to, going back there was kind of like David, I asked you, what are you doing in France? You know, you didn't say going to Paris, although the bread is wonderful everywhere. You said, I'm going to where my parents were arrested. And I felt like I was going back to the scene of a crime. And at the same time, a place where, if not for the war, I probably would still be, you know, a place where my entire family lived, where my brother lived, where, you know, where there was a life. And it was just erased. So, but I had, for me, I had to go back there. And there were some, you know, there were other coincidences and things that happened there, but I'd heard the name and I felt like I had no choice. So again, the idea of doing something. But, you know, I have to say, you know, as a child of survivors, that doing, for me, doing is really, it helped me deal with getting a grip, kind of holding it in my hands. You know, this amorphous kind of thing that I grew up with, this kind of putting it in a place that I could look at. And so, but, and I just want to say I'm still doing that. It's not something that is, I'm done, you know, it's all settled. It's not, it's just, it's not, it's ongoing. And that's okay. It's, you know, that's the way it is. So I would like to ask you, number one, if there are any questions, and I would also like to ask you too, if anyone would like to, what I shared was my journey in coming to terms with my history, my ongoing journey, which is still ongoing, not resolved. But if you have questions of me about my whatever, or, and also if anyone would like to share what something about your journey.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Phyllis. I see Ann Weiss finally revealed her face to the group, and I know that Ann was also helpful to you in this project, Phyllis. Hi, Ann. I just want to interject. First of all, I am in Lille, which is a city in the far north of France, near Belgium. This is the city where my father was working as an engineer when he was arrested by the Gestapo on August 8th, 1942. I'm here. I have posted today a picture of myself outside of the building where he was living with a woman at the time of his arrest. I posted it on Facebook. You know, I want to say that this book that Phyllis put together of her dad's memoirs is powerful for many reasons. But for those of us who are children of survivors, it reminds us of the fact that most of us came from families in which these memories were suppressed until some of us had the gumption to ask our parents to talk about them. In the case of my late mother, as it happens, as you probably know, she survived in the sewers of Lviv for 14 months and was saved by 3 Polish Catholic sewer workers at the risk of their lives and their families' lives. And she therefore emerged with a very positive outlook on the world. And as a result, not too long after she arrived in the United States, she was able to speak publicly about her experiences. It was very, 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 very rare, needless to say. Starting in 1949, my mother spoke all over the United States in perfect English about her experiences. And I attribute this to the fact that she was saved by Polish Catholic sewer workers. My father, on the other hand, who, as I mentioned, was arrested here in this city where I'm coming to you from today, the French city of Lille, he experienced some of the most atrocious and horrendous terror that one can imagine, having been in Auschwitz and Buchenwald. And so he was, like Phyllis's dad, disinterested in talking about it, but he started talking about it after my mother died, and he was invited to many places to speak about it. He lived a very long life up until 2006 when he died at the age of 92. And mother, on the other hand, died at the age of 60 in a Philadelphia hospital during cardiac bypass surgery at a time when such surgery was not very routine. Phyllis, with all due respect, you read you read your prologue, but I think that this last chapter, Nobody is Sorry for Me, is so powerful that I'm going to read a little bit of it here. This story came to my mind when I had a dream last night. I had a dream from the war all the time, and it still didn't stop. I woke up very shaky. I went downstairs and smoked a cigarette. I sat in the chair and I reminded myself about the eggs and the fire, about the whole town coming out to watch the poor little shack. It reminds me of the survivors gathering that will be held soon. The people are coming together. It's getting a lot of attention, but Jews were being burned in Europe by the millions and no one looked. Everybody burned up. Nobody was around. Now they're all coming. Now the survivors are making a gathering. Will there be entertainment? Will there be speaking? It doesn't appeal to me, but I cannot criticize. I don't know if this is right or wrong. What percentage from all the people, the survivors, are left? 2%, 3%? So the 3% are making a big gathering. In my opinion, they will never be able to explain what was. You guys haven't seen me cry before on these calls. I was in a lot of places during the war, and certain places and things I saw people don't even talk about. Certain places and things I saw people don't even talk about because they were not there. There were no witnesses. For example, near us was a village, Mykolaiv. It was far from a railroad. There were a nice few families, Jewish people, living there. The Germans took them out all together to this little mountain. The people dug their own graves. They put the Jews in the hole, except for 2 people who they left alive to cover the dead with earth. They shot them. When they finished digging, they shot those 2 people also. Nobody knows about this. Nothing. And this was happening in thousands of villages. Nobody talks about this. They only talk about the ghetto from Warsaw and about Treblinka or Auschwitz or Majdanek, where the majority who lived were. Hundreds of thousands of people were shot down like this. I do
remember this.
remember this.
Yeah.
I want to say also that this town that Phyllis's parents came from is now called Shtorovichi. It is northeast of Lviv, halfway between Lviv and Rivne, and very close to Brody. I have been to all these places. I have never been to this little town where there aren't any Jews left, but I have been to Brody, where there is still a beautiful shell of a synagogue from that thriving Jewish community.
Right.
So I'm going to ask anybody who wants to ask a question. Rondi is trying to give me tissue so I can wipe my eyes. Anybody who wants to ask a question, please go right ahead. Thank you.
Okay, well, this is Steve Lutzen. It's not so much a question than an observation. First of all, to say to you, David, that there's no embarrassment in crying because all of us are crying inside in one way or another. 1 and 2, frankly, it's very cathartic to cry. And so I encourage your courage not to be in any way embarrassed by it. And as for the speaker today, it's outstanding what you shared with us. And being a writer myself, it's a big job. And I just want to share with you that luckily I met David many years ago. And then we have a mutual friend named Max Hirschfeld down in Washington. and he discovered his family's box of letters and he made that into a book. And I
Mm.
think all of us have some kind of box of our family. So I encourage you all to, in effect, as I call it, instead of thinking outside the box, you should think inside the box. And it sounds kind of obvious, but I can tell you for myself, you find things that you obviously didn't remember, and it's piecing together a past that in ways was taken away from us. And it gives you a little bit of, I guess, psychological satisfaction. But I just share that with you because it's something I do. I happen to love scanning and visuals and videos and very media oriented, but I just think telling your story in any way, shape, or form, whether it's by book, by video, even through pictures, is really valuable.
Isabel.
Isabel.
Thank you, Steve. Isabel?
Couple of things. One is just to dovetail on what Stephen just said. If you're not going to turn it into a book or a story or a video or something, please pack it up and send it to Washington, D.C. for the archives. There are people who are doing research, and it's really, really important that they have these resources if you're not going to use them, or make sure that it's packed up and sent down there before you pass or throw them away, or your kids throw them away. That's my first comment. And also, Phyllis, what language did you speak at home with your parents?
Yiddish.
Okay, and when you went to their hometown to visit, were you able to communicate in Yiddish?
Oh, no. We had Svetlana. Svetlana teaches in English at the university in Lviv, and we hired her as our guide. They spoke Ukrainian.
I was well,
yeah.
I know when my father took us to visit Lviv, whatever. One of the hardest parts was learning how to figure out the street signs because they're all different. And so, yeah, I figured you didn't speak Ukrainian, so I wanted to know how you were communicating. Thank you.
Yeah, we had a guide. Yeah, without her, it would have been like nothing. I mean, we couldn't do anything.
Thanks, Isabel. Steve, do you have your hand up again for a reason? I see.
No, I did it. I'm sorry, I should have taken it down. My apologies. Here, I'll lower it. There we go.
Okay. Okay.
I just want to say something about the book, that two things that I did with the book. One, when I was in Brody, when I went to my parents' town, we also went to Brody. That's where they were in the ghetto. Our guide found the high school history teacher in Brody. Like that. She found him. He took us around for a day, and then I sent him a copy of the book and what the English teacher in the high school, and he made a project of the students, the senior project, translated the book into Ukrainian. And all the students in the class sent me letters in English, lovely letters. And they sent me a copy of the book that they translated into Ukrainian. They made a hard copy of the book. And it was just fabulous. And then I sent that hard copy. There was in Kiev, there is a Jewish Holocaust Center. I don't know what's happening now, but I sent them a copy of the book that the students translated, and I wanted to know if they could use it. And they said, well, it's a student translation. If we could retranslate it for you and then make copies of the book. And I sent them money to do that. They said, we don't have money, but it's a wonderful story. And they retranslated it and made 500 books for their center. And then I also sent 100 books. My parents' family were killed, some of them in Belzec. And I went there, and they have a museum. It's about the size of my kitchen, because there are no, and I have a small kitchen, there are no remnants. There's nothing left. It's not like objects. They have a few little objects in there, but I sent them 100 copies of the book to sell in the museum. And, I felt like this story should be there. And that was that. So I felt good about doing that, just doing something with it. And that's all.
Yeah, that's right. And I just want to clarify for everyone, Belzec, Belzec, was an absolute annihilation point from which only 1 or 2 people are known ever to have escaped or survived. That's
Right.
where my mother's family ended up. And not to be confused, sometimes it is confused with Bergen-Belsen, which is Belsen.
Yeah.
Okay, we have Marcy Lebovitz, who is, and her husband. Marcy is part of the Wilmington contingent on this call, although she now lives in California. Marcy, nice to see you. Go ahead. You have to unmute yourself. Can you all hear Marcy?
Mm-mm. No.
All right.
No,
How about now? Marcy? Can't hear you.
Mm-mm. No. Can't hear.
Can I make a quick comment? This is Anne.
Uh,
Do you hear
okay.
me?
Yes, who's speaking now?
Anne.
Yes, Ann, please, go ahead. Marcy, we'll try to get back to you.
Well, first, I was supposed to be somewhere else, but when Jeanette told me that Phyllis is speaking right now, I had to delay everything. So the minute I finish making this comment, I absolutely have to leave.
Mhm.
But I couldn't miss this because Phyllis, well, first, you're important to me. Your father's story and what you did to preserve it is important to anybody who has a heart. So I want to say, Yasha Koach, you did a beautiful job. I also love what you did at the end with, how you created your story and what you did, and this message that all of us who are children of survivors, this is an enormous piece of history. As I interview survivors and their children, and now we're doing grandchildren, but one put it so well. The biggest event in my life happened before I was born. Now, I think that person said it very aptly, but
Mhm.
your what you did to honor the family of that farmer, and while the wife was still alive, but not wanting to disturb your parents in heaven, let your mother keep polishing the silver and your father keep playing cards. That's so sweet on their part and so wonderful on yours. So again, Yasher Koach. And the only other thing I'd like to say publicly is this is a very, very, very emotional time in my life. Lag BaOmer is in 2 days. That's the day my parents got married. It was the first day after the war that religious people could get married, 1945. But Erev Lag BaOmer in 43 is when my mother's her immediate family and most of her extended family were murdered. So it's like that combination of Yom HaZikaron, where we grieve, and then Yom HaAtzmaut, where we celebrate. I have to admit, I grieve more about the murder of everybody than I'm happy my parents got married, but the other is so overwhelming. So the fact that it's happening, I light the candle tonight because tonight is when Erev starts. It feels very special that I'm seeing you and hearing your story today of all days.
Thank you. I just want to add
Thanks for
that
being.
Ann is the author of the last album, Eyes from the Ashes of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Ann was instrumental in bringing to the public a book of photographs that may otherwise have never been seen, that she
A
found.
photo that Hitler never wanted anybody to see, because if you're telling people that Jews are subhuman, you can't have photos like these. And these are the very photos that Jews deported to Auschwitz brought with them to remember not themselves, but the people they cherished. Thanks, David. And thanks for doing this. And I can't believe you're in France now, in Lille. Anyway, goodbye to everybody. Now,
Before you leave, I want to extract a promise that you'll be joining us for future programs.
I only heard about this thanks to Jeanette. So if you just let me know directly when I'm in town, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Many thanks. And
Thank
Diane,
wonderful, Phyllis. You and
thanks
I
for
will
coming.
talk another time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Is, let's see here. Stephanie and Jeff Strauss.
Well, it's great to see everybody. And Phyllis, I've heard bits and pieces of your story over the years that I've known you, but this was just overwhelming. It was such a tribute and such a joy, and with sadness, of course, to listen to this. So I can't thank you enough, and I'm sending you lots of hugs.
Thank you. Sweet.
It's very, very, very sweet. I also want to know if the Sterling that's on this program is a relation to you.
To be continued.
Is the Sterling on this
Not-
call?
Not that we
No?
know of, not that we know of.
Okay.
I said to be continued.
Oh, I got it now.
We don't
we
know
had a
yet.
little conversation before we started the show, and Joe Sterling is a dear friend of mine, a former colleague at CNN in Atlanta, and he just learned, he and Phyllis just learned that they grew up within walking distance of each other in
Winfield.
Winfield.
Yeah. So as Phyllis said, it's to be continued.
Right.
Right, and I couldn't make it earlier because I was out of town and just got in and did not want to miss this. So I said to Stephanie, we have to be home by 2:00. If not, I would have pulled you in over the phone because I could have done that, but it's easier on the computer. So thanks again.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jeff.
Absolutely.
Susan?
Hi, good afternoon. Phyllis, you triggered a couple of thoughts for me. And I would like Jeffrey, my brother, to unmute because he probably is much more facile with some of the details if needed. But there are two things. One thought is that you mentioned briefly about not spending or not having or not being fully informed about life before the war. And I think that it is such a critical piece in our work as 2G, working with whomever it is, telling our stories, to be able to make sure that people understand we're not just victims of a horrendous situation, but our families had full lives before the war. So I think that that's such a critical piece to make sure that we talk about what happened before the war, make sure people understand we were full human people, not just victims. So that's one big idea. The other that I want to mention is that Jeffrey, my husband, my two sons, and I visited some years ago. This is where I asked Jeffrey, what year was that? It was about 15 years ago, Jeff?
2003.
When he unmuted. 2003. Okay, so 20 years ago. So when we went to see the
Or 4, not sure.
Okay, we saw the sites both from my mother's life and also from my father's life. It was an amazing journey, and a cousin of my mother's actually took us around to various in Austria, to various cemeteries. And the reason why I bring that up is, as a child, I always felt almost rootless. I did not have grandparents like everybody else did. I didn't have family like almost everybody else did. I almost felt alone in many, many ways. And when we went back, and I especially remember going to the cemetery of my father's people and having something like 9 generations of graves for us to see. And I thought to myself then, and it was life-changing for me, and it still is today, that I had deep, deep roots in Germany, nonetheless, deep roots. And that was so critical. That journey, especially with my family, was just something that to this day, I have chills from it.
Mm.
So that's what I wanted to share with the group.
Yeah, we're not tourists.
And thank you,
like
Phil.
going to see the sites. It's a like a pilgrimage. It's a completely different. Yeah, fabulous that you had that experience. That's really wonderful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Simone is former president of our organization, and she led these Zoom meetings for quite some time, very effectively, before I was asked to start doing it. And so she has the floor now.
So Phyllis, I want to thank you and tell you again, I'm going to read the book. I've been telling you that for a really long time.
We're all witnesses, by the way. So yeah.
Yeah, it's on the list of books that I'm going to read, of course. Yashikoa for doing such a great job. Two things. One is I always find it interesting that we say we're going back to where our parents are from, which is a place we've never been.
Right.
It's not our home, but we always refer to it as going back. So I think that's, and every child of survivors I know says that. So it's really interesting that that's the take that we have of those places that our parents came from. Second is, my sister was murdered during the war, and I don't know a lot about her. I know I have some stories about her, but I was wondering what it was like for you to find out that you had a brother.
Well, it was, I don't know what word comes, it was overwhelming. It was really overwhelming because I wasn't sure. When I asked my father, it wasn't like I knew, but I kind of had a sense. But it also brought up the taboo. It's not like if you ask someone about something and then they say, oh, well, this would lead to more questions. And now you've opened a door and now you know. It was like the door was open for a split second and then shut. So it did not open a discussion about him or questions, but it kind of confirmed, in retrospect, I totally understand how my mother was so traumatized because she was with my brother. My father was taken to this camp. So it really fills in the story of her trauma much more, knowing that. But I wish it were an opening, but it was like, okay, now I know. Now that's it. Stop, no more questions. Did you ask questions? Did you get information?
I did ask questions because I once spoke about my sister.
Okay.
So I asked questions so that I could speak about her more.
Okay.
Now, she was my father's daughter, but my mother was the one that told me stories about her.
Because he couldn't.
Probably. They were all in the Lodz ghetto, and the two families were connected. So my mother knew her.
Gotcha.
But I also want to say that, and there's like a record of her because they were in the Lodz Ghetto,
Mm,
and everybody has a record from the Lodz Ghetto. But when I went to Yad Vashem, to the Children's Memorial, it felt like she was there with me.
mm,
So that was a very moving experience for me.
wow.
Thank
Yeah.
you again.
Yeah, thank you.
David's muted.
David, you're muted. David, you're muted.
All right, thank you. Marcy Lebovitz and Gary Zembo are in Santa Monica, California, even though Marcy is a Wilmingtonian, which I just like to emphasize. Let's see if we can hear them.
Yes, can you hear us? We're now on the phone using it. Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Yes.
As far as the Wilmingtonians go, David, you're doing, an amazing, amazing thing for the community. But I must give Marcy more credit because Marcy's parents are not survivors. And she is so conscientious and loving about my parents who are so interested and so helpful. I wish all of you children of survivors have partners that are as supportive. So it's just incredible. Your stories, Phyllis, were just amazing. And it's very sad to realize that they are endless. There's just, no end to them. My specific experiences or little anecdotes are things like I did get to go with my father 24 years ago to Poland for a very difficult trip. Not just that the trip was difficult of an experience, but he was just a difficult man. He spoke Polish to everybody he was there with, didn't spend 1 minute translating for me. So luckily I recorded things and I'm still in the process of trying to get all those recordings translated. So this years later, I will have that. The other unique experience that I'm just going to focus on right now is, so when my father died in 2006, I felt that there was a marker for him, but for none of his family members. And at the particular cemetery in Paramus, New Jersey, there are footstones for each individual, and a group of family members' graves has a family stone, and it can only have the family name. And we applied to the cemetery owner if we could put the names and birth years and year of death of all the family members that died, so there would be a memorial for them that people would see and their names would exist somewhere in public. And this Jewish cemetery owner turned us down and said that people would assume that it was a mass grave. And we have nationally respected people like David Wolpe and Michael Berenbaum write letters, and it did no good. So we're still holding out hope eventually future owners might say yes, but I'm a tech consultant now, and I'm in the process of trying to get, of course, the simplest memorial website up, but I would like to start adding things like, I already asked them, can I put a QR code on the family stone so anybody who visits could use that code to look online and see all the family information? And they said, no, we don't do that. So now I'm intending to put what's known as an RFID tag there so that I can kind of still make that connection. But I think the information, what I'm trying to do, and Phyllis, I mean no disrespect, but these stories need to be made as public as possible and free. I've never understood the selling of books of these stories. I can't imagine anybody's making any significant money from it. And it does, in a sense, stop people who might be interested. So my one suggestion, friendly suggestion, Phyllis, is narrate your book on video and put it on YouTube so anybody can see it, and your family's memory will hopefully be there for anyone to access for decades and decades to come. So thank you,
Well,
though.
yeah, no,
Let me speak on behalf of Phyllis. I know that she has never sold this book for profit.
Yeah.
I know that initially, I'll let her say more, but I know that initially all of the proceeds went to Jewish charities in Israel.
right.
But
Yeah,
I'll let-
no, yeah, thank you, David, but that's true. And I just want to, an aside, I wanted, it's on Kindle, and I put it on Kindle Direct, which is free to anyone who is a member of Kindle Direct. So people who have Kindles and you're on Kindle Direct, you can get the book for free, because I wanted more people to read it. But what's interesting is I didn't find more people were reading it, even though it was free, and as opposed to on Kindle where it's about $5 or $6. But I love the idea of narrating it and putting it on YouTube. I think that's a great idea. And oy boy, you've given me something else to think about. I just do. But I think it is a great idea. I'm so thrilled, honestly, when people tell me that they've read the book. What I say is, stories die when they're not told. Here is a story that, and I thank you for reading this story, because you're keeping it alive. And that's how I feel. So I have no intention. My intention is really to keep this alive, and narrating it, is a great idea. I will really explore that, and putting it on YouTube, because everything is on YouTube, whether you like it or not. This might be on YouTube. It's like everything shows up there. But thank you for that suggestion.
Welcome. Thank you.
Isabel.
Sorry, but person with phone number 201-725.
Isabel, we can't hear you for some reason.
Can you identify yourself, the person who has the phone number 201-725-331?
Oh, that's us.
Oh, no, then you're on there twice. All right,
Right, that.
all right, thank you.
That's how,
Thank
Yeah.
you, I appreciate it.
that's how Gary and Marcy were able.
They came on the phone. Yeah.
Talk about narrating, Phyllis. Maybe if you use some of the excerpts with your father's voice would be really powerful, and
Yeah, I think a man should narrate. That's a good point. I think a man, if I have it narrated, I think a man should read it.
yeah, but using some of your father's recordings and that people can hear his accent.
Oh, I see.
Now, maybe not the whole thing.
The actual recordings, right.
Use some of his own voice so people can actually hear his voice, his accent, how he says things would really add more, even more power to the book.
I just want to say something. I put those tapes on a disc. Okay. And I haven't been able to listen to them myself. I have not even once.
Oh, I totally understand that.
I haven't.
How did you transcribe it then? How was it transcribed?
I
It
agree
was
with Gail, who also grew up in Wilmington, I will say. And I think that eventually, before too long, Phyllis, you'll be able to listen to this and maybe get some advisors to help bring it to the public. In the meantime, can you let us all know, let everybody on this call know how they can get hold of this extraordinary book?
Well, okay. One way, as I mentioned, if you are on Kindle Direct, it's free. If you can get, I would be happy. This is a Hamish, a lovely group. If you want a hard copy, just send me your address. I'll send you a copy of the book, and the US mail will deliver it to you. That's it. With pleasure.
Simone already promised to read it, so you better
Yeah,
send
she's
her-
had it for a long time now. We all heard her, so, we're gonna have to keep
Well, we
to
have
it.
her, this program was taped, so,
Yes,
she
yes. we
now
can-
has to read it because we
Exactly.
will. But
Phyllis?
Phyllis,
Yeah.
to say what Gail said, I think that would be great. If you've ever listened to the 3Gs talk about their grandparents, many times within a solid 20 to 30 minutes, they present a powerful story like you did. And in some of them, they've interjected the voice, and
The
it just makes
voice.
it come alive. And,
Yeah.
just a little excerpt of what they were shadowing or talking about, and then you hear it in the survivors'
Well, yeah.
accent and words. It's
If
powerful.
anyone here has expertise or, any way to, help me figure how to do this, please contact me, because I think that's a really fabulous idea that, and I appreciate it.
Well,
David, what
who
about-
transcribed it?
Rosalind Rudolph has.
No,
no.
All right, let me just say one thing. You asked who transcribed. I had it typed up first from the tapes. And then I gave the, the woman who edited for me, she took it from there. Yeah. Anyway.
Roz,
David, I'm sorry.
That's okay, Phyllis. Yasher on your wonderful accomplishments. When you went back to your parents' village, was there a synagogue building that was still standing? And I'm seeing you shaking your head no.
No.
What percentage of the population pre-war was still there?
Oh, you mean what percentage of the
Pre-war.
you don't mean Jewish people? There are no Jewish people left. No. I'd say about a third were still there.
Wow.
Yeah, it diminished. It was about a third Jewish, a third Ukrainian, and a third Polish. And I learned to distinguish. There were, the people who helped my parents they considered themselves Polish, even though, and it was Poland at the time, but it was a combination of those three, but about a third are still there. It's a farming village. It's really dirt roads, horses and wagons. We saw horses and wagons, one or two cars, but also still horses and wagons.
So that's how your father and mother happened to know a Polish farmer then, right? Because part of the population is Polish.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. They were in this town. It was a combination of Poles, Ukrainians, and Jews living
I was
all
wondering
together.
how that all connected. Okay.
Yeah, and the Jews mostly kept to themselves, but my father did not. So he had this friend, and that's really, it helped him. But after the war, when they went back, and the priest, the Polish priest, they went back. They found their way back to the town. The Polish priest gave them dinner and said, "Get out now. You won't, if you want to live." Their houses were taken. Everything in their houses was taken. And they said, "You get out because they're going to kill you."
I want to thank everybody for their excellent questions. If you get your hands on the book, you won't have any more questions.
Yeah.
The book is called Light in Darkness, a survivor's story by Simon Sterling, as told to Phyllis Sterling Jacobs, and it was published in 2005. I want to remind everybody that our next special program will be June 25th, Sunday, June 25th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Andrew Cassell, former longtime reporter and columnist at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Gabriel Laufer, coming to us from Charlottesville, with whom he collaborated on bringing out a book by Dr. Aharon Pick, who was a friend of Andy Cassell's grandfather. Dr. Pick died in 1944. The book is called Notes from the Valley of Slaughter, a memoir from the ghetto of Shalia, Lithuania. You can pick up a copy of that on Amazon before the program. Please join us for that program. I want to thank.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. I just see some people in the chats wrote me, but the chat will disappear, poof, when we disappear. So what I'm going to do instead, I can't write it all down so quickly. And Joe, I did get your email address. What I will do is I will give you my, I'll give you my phone number. That's easy. Just leave a message if I don't answer. Give me a call, leave it, text me or just text me your address. That would be easiest for me. Because
Phone number in the chat, Phyllis. Put your phone number in the chat.
I will put my phone number in the chat. Thank you.
But
So
as
that way-
Phyllis indicates, this is Steve Lutson, the chat's gonna evaporate as soon as we
Yes.
close this call, but
So-
there is a method. There's a method at the bottom of the chat. Someone taught me. You hit one of
Oh.
those three little buttons and you could actually copy and paste the entire chat.
Oh,
And you
That's
could
good,
copy
Steve.
and paste into it.
That's good, Steve.
I'm going to do,
Phyllis, in the meantime,
1 minute.
you can actually speak your phone number right now.
I was just going to say, I'm going to do it the old fashioned way. Grab a pencil. You remember what these are, or a pen, I do. 610-724-1760. You can call me or
Could you repeat
text
that?
me. Yes, 610-724-1760. So if you text me your address,
724.
yes, once, I'll repeat one more time, 610-724-1760.
All right, thank you. Phyllis, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
Okay. No, hello. I just want to thank everyone for your kind attention and your questions. It was really, and thank David again for spurring me on to do this. I really do appreciate it. And thank you for your suggestions. And this was really special for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank everybody for joining us. And
Bon appetit.
please join us again.
All right.
For the next one. Take care. It's now 9:30 p.m. in Lille.
Yeah.
And I know that you're all getting ready to cheer on the Sixers. So I'll let you go. Thank you
Enjoy
very
your
much.
dinner and the
Thanks,
bread.
everybody.
And safe
Phyllis-
travels, David.
Phyllis, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
Phyllis.
My pleasure.
Good to see everybody.